ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
As motorists, we've become used to tolls. We've been paying them for a long time, even before the Harbour Bridge in Sydney was opened. But over the years, the cost has been spiralling upwards, and it's become prohibitive for so many drivers. Today, Four Corners reporter Pat McGrath on his investigation into how it became such a lucrative industry for just a few private companies. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Pat, when you drive around Sydney, which I try not to do too much actually, but, beep, beep, beep is a constant sound in my car. And every time it happens, I know it's going to be really expensive.
That's right. And it's not just in Sydney, it's in Melbourne and Brisbane as well. And during this cost of living crisis that everyone's been going through for the past few years, it's really starting to bite. There goes another toll.
And we're going to get a sense from you about just how bad it has become. To do that, just tell me about Edwina, because she has really, really struggled with tolls.
Yeah, so Edwina, she lives in Sydney's northwest, and until August last year, she was driving to work in the eastern suburbs to her job as a school administrator every day. And so she was taking 3 toll roads to get there and back and paying $30 a day. And that ended up being $150 a week. And so that was a huge cost for her and a huge cost for anyone who has to do that kind of trip pretty regularly, which is something that we know lots of people do.
I can still feel that sick feeling if I hear the low balance beep, 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 you kind of go...
The overwhelming thing for her was that she just couldn't afford these toll roads anymore.
Knowing that we're getting ready for my youngest daughter to go to high school next year and kind of doing the sums around that and just working out that I didn't earn enough to pay the school fees and cover the tolls, and so I needed to find something closer to home.
So you actually had to quit your job because toll roads, just getting to work, became too expensive?
Yeah, it just wasn't feasible anymore to pay that kind of money in tolls.
Yeah, and travelling on non-toll roads can make your journey really, really long. But there are people, of course, who will just suck that up and instead of paying the toll, they will go on the non-toll road. And, of course, the problem with that is those roads get really, really busy.
That's right. And that's something that we're starting to see now, and something that even the New South Wales government is acknowledging quite extraordinarily, that these roads that are supposed to be speeding traffic up by getting people onto these paid roads is actually contributing to more congestion in suburban and local streets.
If I use toll roads every time where I have the opportunity to use it, I won't make any money. It would just be too expensive.
What percentage of your income are you paying in tolls?
It could be as high as 20%.
20%?
Yeah.
Walter Coppin, he's a truck driver. He's a contract courier truck driver that does deliveries around Sydney. And he has no choice but to drive on local streets sometimes. And he's actually been told by the company that he works for, that he's a contractor to, that he can't go on toll roads unless he pays for it himself.
Yeah, we had a letter to say not to use toll roads. Because if they don't, then they have to reimburse us for the toll roads. So it'd be nice if we could, bounce this cost up the line.
There was a landmark ruling in New South Wales 3 years ago that basically obliged freight companies and trucking companies to pay their contract drivers if they go on toll roads. And the response from some trucking companies has been to explicitly tell drivers not to go on them. So we have this remarkable situation where the exact type of drivers that are supposed to be going on these roads to stop congestion on local streets are being instructed not to go on them. So it's really causing a problem in Sydney.
Okay, Okay, so let's then, Pat, look at the companies that are dominating the industry. The main one is Transurban. Tell me about that.
So Transurban, it's by far the most dominant player in the industry in Australia. It owns CityLink in Melbourne, its most profitable road, and then it owns every road in Sydney, every toll road in Sydney, along with its investment partners, except for the Sydney Harbour Bridge and Tunnel. And in Brisbane, it owns all 6 toll roads in the city there. So it's clearly the dominant player, and some would say a monopoly player in this industry. And it's been doing extremely well during this cost of living crisis, which has seen its toll revenue soar. And the reason for that is that the contracts that these toll companies have with governments guarantee toll price increases that are pegged to the consumer price index. So if the consumer price index or inflation gets up, 6 or 7%, then toll prices surge up to that level as well. The flip side is that during times of low inflation, a lot of these contracts, or most of these contracts that Transurban has with governments, they have a guaranteed 4% increase in prices. So even when inflation is low, they get a rise that's higher than inflation. And in times of high inflation, they do really well.
Pat, also a really interesting part of your Four Corners piece goes to unpaid tolls. And this can happen to a lot of people if they don't realise they're going in a tollway or if they don't have the device attached to their windscreen. So you've travelled up and down the East Coast to Melbourne and Brisbane. Just tell me about how the criminal justice system plays a role here.
Yeah, I've got to say, I didn't have any idea about this until we started looking into this, and it's been quite a confronting thing to discover just how serious it can get for people who don't or can't, for whatever reason, pay their tolls. And I've got to say, it's really hard to find people who are intentionally not paying to use these roads. Generally, they've got something else going on in their lives. They've got health issues, they've got domestic violence, or there's something going on that's meaning that this isn't a priority for them. In Victoria, if you don't pay your tolls, essentially what happens is you get a debt sent to you that will escalate with administration fees that get piled on. If you don't pay that, it gets handed over to the state, basically, to be enforced as a fine. And we can't find any other private companies that have this entitlement to, hand over debts to the state to be enforced as a fine. If you let that go, you get hundreds of dollars loaded onto those fines to the point where you end up, with up around $340, $350 per fine. And if you've got multiple fines, you can end up with tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what happens is, in extreme circumstances, is the Victorian Sheriff's Office will come around to your house and basically arrest you and put you on bail to appear in court.
Wow. Okay, and you spoke to roofer Bruce Mabus. Tell me about his story, because he got caught up in this.
He didn't pay for some health reasons about $12,000 worth of tolls over the past sort of 7 or 8 years, and that's been handed over to the state to enforce as a debt. And he's wound up with $185,000
oh my gosh.
in fines, which he just has no idea how to deal with it.
I'm hoping for the outcome of it's getting squashed, because I am doing the right thing by paying the toll bill off, which is essentially what it's all about. Hopefully I can move on and start living a bit more life than always worrying about this debt that's hanging over my head.
No, my gosh, that is a lot of money. So taxpayers are actually paying so a private company can get money back from these people, so they're prosecuted in a court. That seems extraordinary. Yeah.
Importantly, the question for people who deal with these kinds of cases all the time is whether using the force of the state and the criminal justice system to enforce these fines is really appropriate. That they say this is basically amounts to the state protecting the revenues of private companies. And in the case of Bruce, this was really surprising as I was sitting in court and watching the magistrate deal with his case, that he was told if he couldn't pay, then there is the threat of prison time, that there's basically a conversion for the fines, that if he doesn't pay, the magistrate told him he could end up with 940 days in prison for not paying his tolls.
Oh my gosh.
They've changed the system so you can only get issued one fine per week. And that's seen a massive decline in the number of these fines being issued to people and the number of people winding up in court.
These are also based on contracts that are done between a government and the company like Transurban. So what's Transurban been saying about this?
Yeah, Transurban has declined our request for an interview and hasn't responded to specific questions, but it says it has a range of hardship measures available to people if people do find themselves in trouble with tolls, that there are options open to them. But really, this is baked into the law in Victoria. You know, this fines issue, it's part of the legislation that set up these two roads. So in order for this to change, it's going to take some movement from the Victorian government.
And you also spoke to a former director of Transurban who was very interesting because he actually thinks this system does need fixing.
Yeah, so Tony Shepherd, I don't think you could meet many people in Australia who've had such a hand in the toll road industry as Tony Shepherd. He was involved in Transurban in its early days, building CityLink in Melbourne. He worked on the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, EastLink. He was the first chairman of WestConnect. So he's an extremely qualified toll road veteran. But he's saying that these automatic price increases that are tied to 4% for every year, they need to go.
Well, I think in new projects, I think we can eliminate it. Now, we put it in originally because the risks were just so enormous, and that was what we needed to get people to be prepared to invest. Now, I think now we've matured in the business, and I think now it would be better to tie it to actual inflation and be more acceptable to the users.
Yeah, okay. So in New South Wales as well, they do have this temporary cap on weekly tolls in place. That must help.
This is, a really urgent issue for the New South Wales government. Their election campaign last year, they made this a massive issue and they were really promising to bring down toll prices in Sydney. And this is a temporary measure. And in a sense, I mean, it's kind of a Band-Aid measure. It is providing a lot of relief to people, but it's effectively the government funding the toll road network. So there does need to be something more permanent, and that's what the government is promising at the moment. The New South Wales government is locked in negotiations with Transurban, and this all came about because of a review that the former ACCC chairman Alan Fells did on toll roads in New South Wales.
Transurban would like the system to continue forever, but they need a social licence, and that social licence is diminishing quite heavily because the public does not like the very high prices, and governments will have to step in and do something.
And that review basically boiled down to one key recommendation, and that was that all the toll road prices in Sydney are a bit chaotic. There's different roads with different prices, and how you get charged on each different road depends on which one you're on. He recommended bringing those prices all into a sort of central agency that can set prices and take them out of the control of these contracts that Transurban and its investment partners have with the state. There may be little choice for the government but to legislate to actually force a change.
Yeah, it's pretty clear, isn't it, Pat, that this is a big issue for voters, for people trying to get around these big cities. And I'm guessing that state governments are pretty aware of that by now. So should we expect more movement when it comes to tolls around the country?
Oh, definitely. It does seem like the tide is turning, and it's going to be an interesting few months to see what the outcome of this fight, essentially, that the New South Wales government has picked with the biggest operator in the business, how this plays out not only for the government but for people who have to use these roads every day.
Pat McGrath is an investigative reporter. You can watch his report tonight on Four Corners on ABC TV at 8:30 or later on iView. In a statement, Transurban says it's working with the New South Wales government to find a solution that benefits everyone, particularly motorists. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed, Cara Jensen McKinnon and Sam Dunn. Audio production by Anna John. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.